Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast. Today I am joined by not only a coworking legend, but also one of my favorite people in coworking, Jeannine from Linden. Welcome to the This Week in Coworking podcast. Thank you for joining us. How are you and where are you right now?
I am okay. I am in my kitchen in the south of the Netherlands. I'm exactly halfway between Amsterdam and Brussels, amongst the cows.
But you also do some co-working things there. Jeannine is the director at the European Co-working Assembly, but also runs a network of both co-working and co-warehousing spaces called Debanking. Do you have any issues with the cows and co-working when you do your search engine optimization, or is it all fine and dandy?
No, because it's spelled differently in Dutch, and my entire online presence with respect to my co-working spaces is all in Dutch. I couldn't actually even there was a joke in the early days of co-working about coworking, because that's how the auto spell things. They kept breaking co-working into coworking, and there are many jokes about that. Some were on Al Gore's internet, but that joke doesn't work in Dutch. So I never had that problem with my co-working space.
Oh, you definitely don't sound Dutch. So you're definitely one of those folks who went over and you landed up building a co-working network in this remote region of the Netherlands. What did you do before you got into co-working for folks who have not had the pleasure of meeting you yet?
Before I went into co-working, I lived in the United States and I practiced law. I am an American lawyer in the state of Georgia. I practiced law from 93 until I moved here in 2004. When I stopped practicing, because I moved, I specialized in high conflict litigation, and that is a practice that crosses a number of boundaries. So high conflict cases, you do domestic relations, you do some criminal work, you do some business corporate kinds of litigation, because those are the litigations that go high conflict, right? So
Absolutely. And we're going to have you on the podcast a number of times in the new year. We've already gone and told you that you're going to be joining us again as a recurring guest. But today we're actually going to dive into what we think may be a higher conflict topic, in the fact that there is this huge movement, especially on some parts of the internet, around this term called debanking. I'm just going down the rabbit hole now, but you've been down this rabbit hole a few times. So folks who are listening in with a co-working hat on, what is debanking?
Debanking is a red hot topic right now mostly among people who are coming out of the sort of crypto area. And I find it really interesting. There've been a number of really good articles. I don't know, do you do show notes? If in
Yes.
the show notes, I have several articles that I want to add to the show notes
Absolutely.
about this, because they demonstrate the depth of not understanding about what is happening. Because I don't think that the people who are talking about debanking, it's coming out of the crypto area because those people tend to work, well, partly it's coming out of the crypto area because crypto handling in crypto, trading crypto, all of it is considered high risk by regulators all over the world. It is by definition high risk. If that's what you're doing, you are engaged in a high risk activity. And it is also because these companies in particular tend to operate internationally. It is not at all uncommon in that sector to have people in 7 different countries all working on one team. Fully distributed teams is the norm to these people. Fully distributed means, number one, you have to do with more regulators, not less, more sets of rules, not less. And also, that is also in a number of countries, the simple fact of being a fully distributed team is a high risk factor for them. I think that the people who are telling their stories online are telling the truth. I think they are saying how it looked to them as it happens to them. But it's clear, if you've ever worked in this area or if you've had to do with highly regulated sectors, there is either the financial institutions they're working with are not fully informing them, which is possible, about what's happening, because the people who they're communicating with are the compliance officers at these companies, and compliance officers It is not required for the CV of a compliance officer to be really good at communicating with consumers. That's not a thing. I think pretty often people are talking past each other, and sometimes it's just a fair percentage of the crypto universe is opposed to regulation in general. And they are people who tend to the libertarian side in general. The response to being regulated can be a little out of size. But in any event, the thing about debanking is that there's parts of what happens with debanking that, in fact, your bank or institution cannot tell you. It is actually a criminal act if your bank identifies a suspicious transaction and does a suspicious transaction report. They are not allowed to tell you that. It's a crime. That is actually not that big a problem. Part of the reason you can't tell anybody is because the vast overwhelming majority of suspicious transaction reports don't go anywhere. The way this works, this is not like when you file one of those, it is not that it goes into a database and some cop looks at it and says, oh, that looks suspicious. I think I'll do something. It isn't like that at all. What happens is actually that it goes into their system, which is a big database, and their system is looking for patterns. So it's the algorithm, very much like the algorithms that govern our lives every day, right? There's an algorithm for that. And if a particular kind of pattern is spotted, then the 7, 8, 10, 20 suspicious transaction reports that got picked up to make that pattern will all be pulled together in one thing, and that gets investigated. But that is fairly far down the line because there you're talking about action by the regulatory agency. Debanking is a step prior to that. It is where the banks want to talk to you about the things that you're doing. When they're doing that, there's a decision happening in their heads that you as their client don't know is happening. That is the loss of communication that I actually think is the most egregious in this, because the decision that's happening in their heads is not, do I think you're a criminal? It is not, do I think you're whitewashing money? It is not, do I think you're engaged in human trafficking? None of these questions are happening at the bank. If they thought you were doing that, you wouldn't have a bank account. The actual question in their mind is, can I build a file? It's all about building files. Can I make clear inside of our systems what these people are doing? Can I make it transparent enough? And that is not what is getting communicated, because I do think that it is extremely normal for people, if your bank sends you an email and says, hi, I need to investigate some of your transactions. That's a little freaky, right? And if the transactions turn out to be payments from your coworkers, then this immediately sets off little flags in your head. Oh my God, is my coworker engaged in human trafficking or whitewashing or whatever the hell? And actually the answer is almost certainly not. But payments by third parties, for example, if you have an accountant in the United States, you are a German, it's very common, you are a German company, you set up a US entity to do some little piece of your international business, and you pay them for a year. You pay for the address, which is the co-working space, you pay for the registered office, you pay for all that stuff, and you pay for it for a year. And then the accountant makes the actual payments out of their bank account, not out of yours. It's very common. These packages, you can just buy them. The problem is then the payment, this happens at the bank level. The payment comes into the bank and it's coming from a bank account that is not your bank account. That's called a third-party payment. Third-party payments are a sign of whitewashing. They occur in whitewashing, obviously. So your bank contacts you and says, I need all the invoices associated with this transaction. The invoices don't have the name of the bank account that made the payment. So then they say, I need from you the contract between this company that made the payment and your coworker. Then you go to your coworker and you say, I need your contract with your administrative services company. And they go, that's none of your business. But that is the part where nobody knows what the bank is doing. Bank is not clearly communicating what it's doing. And because this stuff has been happening now, Hector, when did we first talk about it? 8, 9 years ago? Was it that long?
Yeah.
The first video that I made with you was about this, and nobody in co-working knew about it, because that's the important thing about this. We're now talking about unbanking, but here's the thing. Banks are about 3 years ahead of us. What people in co-working need to understand is we are subject to the exact same rules and the same regulations as the banks. And as difficult as that is to execute, in reality, this is a fact. And so the reason the banks are getting stricter is because the regulators are getting stricter. Banks are about 3 years ahead of us. So if you want to know what's in your future as a co-working space that does what's called domicile, that is virtual offices, then it doesn't have to be virtual offices. Mine are actually not virtual offices, but nevertheless, domicile, a co-working membership. Some people call it basic membership. It is a co-working membership where the people do not come actually to your office on a regular basis. So they come once a year. They come once every 2 years, right? This kind of situation where under the rules as they exist now, we are going to have to be kicking people out. We're going to have to be either making the file or terminating the contracts is coming, and it's going to take between 2 and 3 years from now. A lot of it varies country to country. I know that, for instance, in the United Kingdom, the enforcement authority has simply made, as far as I can tell from reading, they have simply made the principled decision to not impose a fair percentage of the monitoring rules on co-working spaces. So the onboarding, you still have to do all the same stuff as banks. You have to get the IDs, and you have to get the residence address, and you have to get all that stuff, and you have to keep a file in it. And you have to keep track of any really outstanding, peculiar thing that is happening in your space. But the sort of down in the dirty, in the weeds kind of monitoring, where you have to, if a company is, for example, under the rules, if a company is high risk, you have to every 3 months review all their transactions, whatever a transaction may be in a co-working space. This is an excellent question. Nobody knows. Also, the regulators don't know, but whatever. And for a normal domicile co-worker, you have to do it once a year. For high risk ones, once every 3 months. Medium risk is 6-9 months, right? It's all bridged out. And that's a lot of time. And among the issues that comes up again and again in co-working spaces right across Europe is what the regulator thinks is high risk is not necessarily what we think of as high risk, right? Again, the fact that somebody has a distributed team is by definition for the regulator a high risk situation. That somebody wants the domicile address is for the regulator a high risk situation. You have to ask questions about why do you want this and not a normal office, right? For people in co-working, this question is also almost information free. It is almost absurd. It verges on absurd because one of the primary sales aspects, one of the things that makes co-working spaces attractive, especially to people who are in IT, is exactly this, that it is not a normal office that somebody has to be sitting in from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Those people don't work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. They don't work in offices, and they haven't done since long before the pandemic. And that simple fact triggers high risk for the regulator. For us, it definitely does not. And so when the regulator is sitting across from you at the table and saying, this is high risk to unacceptable risk, I need for you to justify your decision to accept a contract with this company. And you're like, I mean, they're like really nice. It's not working like that. And I have had these conversations with regulators where I said, what do you mean I don't know enough about the client? His dog's name is Spot. He likes his coffee with the cream and sugar. He doesn't get up before 9:30 in the morning. His favorite lunch is a turkey sandwich. Let me tell you about my coworker. I know a lot about my coworkers. But this information, which actually I continue to submit, I will die submitting, that this kind of personal contact is in fact an excellent control on whitewashing, fraud, and terrorism financing. People who are regularly contacted about, what do you think we should do with the curtains? Should we go blue or red? What do you think right? All of these normal daily kinds of contacts you have with your coworkers, this human side of it is frankly exactly what crooks do not want. They do not want me saying, hey, you had a visitor. Who was it? The more questions you ask, the more you talk to people, the faster they run away if they are actually there, if they are actually up to no good, right?
So to summarize, the whole debanking thing is the fact that banks would much rather cut remote customers if they found it was too risky, or they just found they couldn't build that file, or they didn't want to build that file. They're just like, have an account here, thank you, goodbye. And what we're assuming is because they're 3 years ahead of us, co-working spaces down the line are going to have to start making the same decisions. Do you want to start collecting this information and asking those annoying questions? Or just say, sorry, you have to go find somewhere else to work, or get your address, or get your mail delivered, because I can't take that risk, that compliance risk, or that regulatory risk, because you check you're a remote company, or you have your mail delivered here, or whatever it is that the regulators see as risky and we don't. So but we're definitely going to start seeing that shift into co-working, have to make those decisions. Whereas up till now, anyone with a credit card can essentially sign up for almost every virtual mail service.
Yes, and that's actually one of the things about the virtual mail services is they're not all of them. There are several who really are, and I actually think it's a valuable service that they do the onboarding KYC, because I do think it's asking a lot of a co-working space operator who's a solo to learn all this stuff. I have every possible advantage, and it took me literally years to figure out what the hell they're talking about. And that's a little tricky. I don't know about everybody. I am already seeing it in my co-working space, not in terms of me making decisions necessarily about keeping or not keeping people. What I am seeing is this creep, and it is a concern that I have very much, is of what is a high-risk business, right? Crypto is going to be the unstoppable force hitting the immovable object. It is, because the uses of crypto, the popularity of crypto is spreading widely and quickly, and the regulators are still in the same position. As it moves, when it's only affecting 250 whales in the whole world, it is a minor problem, right? When it starts to affect the people down the road from you, the enforcement starts to be a problem because it gets out of hand. But I'm seeing already, for example, in transportation is regarded as a high-risk industry for human trafficking. Not a surprise, right? Transportation is also high risk for, and this is over-the-ground transportation, not air transportation. It's also high risk for whitewashing, for things fall off trucks. The thing is, this is already affecting my coworkers, and you're talking about a sole trader and his son, the sole trader, each of whom has one truck. These guys are getting their bank accounts frozen at what appears to them to be random. They don't know where their bank account got frozen. They are then getting unfrozen because they can usually demonstrate fairly quickly that this was not a problem, this transaction.
Yep.
But because over-the-ground transportation is high risk, it is disproportionately affecting the smallest of companies, and that's who our coworkers are. So in transportation, for example, in comparison, when I started in 2010, right? The transportation guy was like a plumber. They're like the backbone of the Dutch economy. They're like sole traders, or they have a BV with themselves and maybe their kid, and they have a bank account at the local bank, and they walk in there every once in a while and have a cup of coffee, right? Like that. At this point, easily half of my coworkers who are in transportation have 3 payment possibilities or more. So they have their bank account. And the problem is, once your bank has betrayed you in this way, they don't go out and find another bank. They go out and find one of the challenger banks, Revolut, right? For example, Revolut's very popular. TransferWise, also very popular. TransferWise. The rebranding that I swear to God is never going to stick. Oh, why do they do that? But anyway, it is still the case that if I type TransferWise into my browser, it comes up with Wise. So I'm good with it. I'm trying to think who else. Bunk is popular in the Netherlands, but it's a Dutch bank. So these sort of challenger banks are usually the backup. And then they're also using Stripe, Molly, PayPal, I don't know, Mongo. What are y'all using in America? Any number of payment services, which are not banks, absolutely not banks, are regulated in some way. And they're just leaving the money in there.
Yep.
That's not a bank account. But
Yep.
sure, from their perspective, it acts like a bank account. They can use their payment service to pay for their hotel, to pay for their food, because the first time that you are out on the road between here and Norway and your bank decides to freeze your bank account, they don't warn you, right? They just notify you, and your bank decides to freeze your bank account so you can't eat, then you start looking for a backup option. And
Yep.
the other thing that I think would be helpful for and I'm actively working in terms of the ECA to try and make these relationships now. I think it would be very helpful for co-working spaces to have relationships with trustworthy second and third options that they can at least recommend to their coworkers, because it is happening more and more. Now, I have more coworkers having this because I have coworkers in the trades. I have coworkers in transport. My guys are not restricted to IT and stuff. It's probably because I'm not in a large city. But in any event, so I have a much more diverse set of members. And of course, I have 2 warehouse locations. And so those are natural for import, export, online shops, and transportation. So the creep of what is high risk is really quite alarming at the lower side, the small business side. Once you get up to medium size, it becomes handleable because you have enough personnel to task to do just that. It's insane that you have to task personnel to do just that. But okay, listen, in import-export, they also have personnel who are tasked with working it out with customs. They're working out the taxes between here and the UK. So tasking somebody to work it out, those are the same kinds of people with the same kinds of competencies. And so that's where that happens.
Yeah.
But yeah,
But you bring up an interesting point, Jeannine, and it's the fact that you're opening non-bank storage of cash. That's also a red flag to regulators. Why aren't you using a bank? Why aren't you? And so by protecting yourself, by creating an additional pool of cash that you can use to run your business, even if you weren't high risk, you're now high risk because you're hedging against the fact that you may one day be high risk. So that's one situation.
If you tell them, I know what they're doing. They're just not telling them.
Yeah, I mean, of course. But I mean, at some point, a transfer will happen from that account. Where did that come from? And then you're triggering reactions that wouldn't have happened if the bank had a better communication strategy, to put it that way. But do you think we'll see a waterfall effect of, let's say they keep using these non-bank channels and paying their co-working spaces with those non-bank channels? Is there a reporting obligation? Is there a risk of the co-working space itself becoming a high-risk business because it's now receiving money from companies or bank accounts that are not assigned to a contract, essentially? Where does it stop, essentially?
Right. Yes, and it depends a great deal on your bank and how they approach these things, and your regulator and how they approach these things. Because it's co-working spaces in the Netherlands, for example, have all been visited this year, if they do domicile, with a letter from their bank that says third-party payments are out. I got one. I didn't bank with my bank for 10 years. Nobody ever told me that, and I've been getting third-party payments for a long time. Because third-party payments are also, for example, I had a long conversation with my bank because third-party payments are also, I have 3 of these in one of my locations. They know each other. You have a parent company in Turkey. You are opening an office in the Netherlands because you're expanding. The amount of trade between Turkey and the Netherlands is enormous. I didn't know that, but I found it out. And so for the first 6 months, while you're getting everything set up, you're finding your employees, you're running it from Turkey. Maybe somebody goes over once a month to make sure everything gets handled. Maybe not, because you can do almost everything online. In the meantime, you're paying for your co-working space from the parent company in Turkey. That's a third-party payment.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was an astonishment to me because I've been doing that for 14 years now. Never heard a word about that being dangerous. Never read a word online about that being dangerous. It's the parent company. I can look at it. But now the instruction is that they want those paid from the bank account, the personal bank account of the entrepreneur themselves. Because I have their ID, I have their residence address, I can identify them, I know who they are. And the other thing, my bank, different banks are different. My bank says, if you have done your AML homework and your file is clean and you have done the investigation you need to do into that Turkish company, then you can take payments from them. It's no problem. But we reserve the right to essentially ask for that entire file at any time.
Mhm.
Fine, except that is a lot of personal information to be handed over. It is one thing for me to hand over my AML file to the Dutch government for purposes of audit. Okay, they have the right, and they're the Dutch government, and I have no right to say no. So that's solved. But so what's the GDPR status of me handing over all of that information to my bank so that which is a commercial partner?
Yep.
Listen, I'm a lawyer. I have no idea.
So for the people who came join this podcast to get answers, sorry for not being able to give you any answers. But yeah, it's just a fascinating topic. As you said, it still hasn't happened yet. We first had a conversation about KYC AML, as you said, 5, 6, maybe 7 years ago, and how operators to this day probably still haven't really thought about how do they store that data? Who can they share it with? Who's in charge of it? Is it stored in a system that's hosted in the US? So all of these things still haven't been addressed with many operators. And I'm switching from Twig to Sync Hat on. Just this year, we've done so many installations of setting up kind of background checks and KYC setups. And then when we spoke about it, other operators are like, why would you do KYC on your co-working members? I was like, what? Why aren't you doing KYC? So it's a very, I think it's, as you're saying, that rock is still there, and crypto and everything else is throwing a lot of force at it. And I think we are going to see a big, hopefully we don't see it. Last time we spoke, we already said that I remember the UK's face being raided by like the Secret Service / the private police there, or the federal police in the UK. You've seen cases of the feds coming in and checking co-working spaces. This is still happening. It's only going to get more enforced. But most things you've talked about so far are mostly in Europe, right? European Union, 6 regulations that rolled out over the last so many years. But for our folks listening on this side of the ocean, guess what? Yeah. So from our conversation we had before is I believe America started this whole wave of we want everyone to be KYC'd. We want to know who everyone's bank account is. I think it was called FinBar at the time, or it's still called FinBar. And we want to know about everyone who has bank accounts. Mm-hmm. Was this what you're talking about now? Has it ever been imposed in America?
Not really, no. Actually, it came out in the United States. They started this movement. We need to control the flow of money because there's so much illegal money flowing through our systems. Most logical way to do that is through parties with licenses. Co-working came in actually a couple of years later, real estate specifically. And of course, the problem is that corporate real estate is home to quite a lot of whitewashing money. And co-working just got slid in there because we are, in fact, a real estate business. It's just not the one they had in mind when they made the rules. Because I have often said one of the protections against whitewashing and co-working is, number one, I don't take cash. And number two, my basic membership is so cheap. If you're whitewashing money, you need to spend a lot of money. Your problem is you have big sacks of money, you can't spend it anywhere. My co-working space is not going to solve that problem for you. So you have to buy one. That will cost you some money. But in any event, the initial concept for all of this, it was born in the United States and then imposed on Europe and probably Latin America and Asia as well, although I have not looked. But in any event, and so all of this huge machinery of Europe got clanking. That took many years because As you know, there are several tax havens in Europe. They were not at all interested in all of this reporting. Now we're on the sixth round of anti-whitewashing legislation in the EU. And so now they're starting it up in the United States. So that's good. And there are lots of banking regulations, but this specific set of them is just getting thoroughly rolled out in the United States. And for example, historically, business registration, creation of corporations has historically always been in the hands of the state, the separate states. And so each state, different states have different entities that they set up, and they have different tax schemes and all of this. And in many ways, the states in the United States compete against each other for certain kinds of corporate citizens in the same way that European nations have done. Right. Yep. And because this one likes this kind and this one likes that kind. So it all works out. But now there are a couple of things happening in the States. And in some ways, it's leading to some misunderstandings. I read an article that essentially said and I love the source. I love them. It is a group that engages in sort of justice litigation. And they're talking about the surveillance program, the federal surveillance program that is going on in the United States. And I'll send you the article. It's a good article. And so I read the article because I was rather alarmed by this. And the federal surveillance program amounts to that your bank monitors your transactions, which is the AML structure. So I think that a lot of, because this stuff is just rolling out in the United States, when I say just rolling out, I don't mean like this week, like it takes a while for these kinds of big regulatory structures to touch people. And I suspect, and this is of course only on the strength of the one article, but I suspect in a way you could definitely frame it as a federal surveillance program. You could, because it's monitoring of financial activity, which takes place at the requirement of the federal government. But the requirement is licensing. At the end of the day, it's a licensing requirement. It is, you have to do these things to get your banking license, because having a banking license it entitles you to quite a lot of things. And so there are requirements that we extract from banks because of that. And all of that is entirely reasonable. The issue comes in a lot because I'm looking at it, from the perspective of co-working, and we got shoehorned into this. We don't have licenses. Mm-hmm. We are not required to demonstrate that the people who work in our co-working spaces are sufficiently educated and qualified to carry out their duties under federal regulations. Because that's what licensing is, right? It is the government saying, yes, you may engage in this protected activity, which we have protected for good reasons, but here's what we need from you in order to do that. And I don't disagree with most of it. I would like for the people who run banks to know what they're doing. We had some doubts in the late 80s, early 90s. I started wondering if those requirements were still in effect. But in any event, you have to demonstrate, if you run a bank, your employees have to demonstrate that they are sufficiently upstanding character. You do background checks, all of these things. These are extremely intrusive things, and applies to us because we are not a licensed entity. Nobody has licensed commercial real estate or sharing an office. So,
Jeannine, you've given us a lot to think about. But one thing that I'll ask you before we jump out, what is the one thing, if nobody has ever thought about this topic before, what is the one thing that a space should start doing no matter what comes around the bend?
For AML KYC or in general? Because let me tell you, you need to register your company with FinCEN. We're putting the link in your show notes because nobody's going to do it and it's going to be a train wreck. But then that is just an administrative thing. The website is terrifying. In fact, it takes 15 seconds. It's a nothing. It's a great big fat nothing. But it's no weirder than putting your business information on the Coworking Wiki. I swear. It's just, but the other thing, that's a practical side note. It is important if you have coworkers who are not sitting in a normal office, if you serve the people in IT, if you serve the people with distributed teams, if you serve the people who have, some of these businesses are look very large. They have entities in 7 countries, and it turns out they have 4 employees, because that can happen and is normal in some sectors. So the problem is the rules weren't made for this. When a regulator looks at that, they say, oh my God, they have $2 million a year in revenue, and they have 7 countries, and they only have 4 employees. They're definitely crooks. And everybody in co-working goes, no, that's chill. What are you talking about? It's worlds that don't understand each other are going to be clashing. And at a minimum, my advice is, if for people who haven't started, you should start. If you're not thinking, you should think, because I think it's rolling our way. And it's a thing, as I have been working since the first time we spoke, on trying to get payment and also KYC solutions that work for co-working. I have now failed twice, and I'm still going. And so we're hoping, I am continuing to work on that. I'm hoping to find a solution in partnering with people who are providing professional solutions and trying to get those products to co-working spaces at a price point they can afford.
Mhm.
Because the idea is not for an unlicensed entity to be taking on the regulatory burden of a bank.
Yep.
It's not possible.
I agree with that. But I'm going to challenge those 3 Fs. And I know that folks who do listen to this are investors. I know that folks are looking for something. So please find Jeannine. I'm going to put all the contact details on the show notes. Reach out to her. I know Jeannine's been working on this for a long time, has done all the wrong things at least once. So therefore, can get the right things done faster. So if you are listening to this and you do want to chat more to Jeannine about this, Jeannine, where's the best place for people to find you?
The easiest place for people to find me is probably on LinkedIn, where have my actual name, address, and phone number. But I'm really easy to find. If you type my name into Google, you will find my phone number, and I'm just extremely transparent that way. I'm very much like Gen X that way. Go on, bring it.
Fantastic.
Bring it.
Let's go. Jeannine, thank you very much for joining me. Thanks for sharing. I'm looking forward to already joining you again as we dig into some other topics. But thanks for just bringing this to the light. It's definitely something that I think everyone should listen to, but also start thinking about. Thanks.
Thanks for having me. Nobody ever wants to talk to me about my nerdy hobbies, and this is definitely one of them.
Oh, just don't worry. Thanks again.
Yeah. All right.